My name is Claire Rivers. I'm 34, an entrepreneur, and I dedicate my life to finding sustainable solutions. That dinner at my parents' house was a scene from a movie I'd rather not be watching. The table was beautifully set, decorated with secrets no tablecloth could hide. And there I sat, between my parents, feeling the air vibrate with thinly veiled disdain. Their indifference to my work at the startup was almost palpable. As the conversation flowed with the typical superficiality that permeated our family interactions, I forced a smile and participated. "So, how's your lettuce patch going, Claire?" My father, Anthony, quipped, delivering the cynical comment like the punchline of an old joke. But for me, it wasn't a joke. It was a direct attack. Whenever he dismissed my work as hippie nonsense, a mix of hurt and anger consumed me. A simmering dissatisfaction that grew silently until it reached boiling point in the most unwelcome way. Little did he know, the vulnerability I displayed at the table was like an impenetrable rock compared to what I was truly feeling. They had no idea what was about to happen. That nonsense they scorned was becoming much bigger than just a startup fueled by fragile egos and ideals. The fight was just beginning. I glanced at my mother, Marina, silent as a shadow flitting across the room. She complimented my father's indifference with a slight nod, a passive affirmation of their disdain. Deep down, I knew the strength of my desire to make a difference starkly contrasted with my family's traditional mindset. It was a hostile environment. The innocence of the child who loved nature was now battling the demons of a reality, where my father's ambition overshadowed compassion for the earth. Taking a sip of my wine, I tried to quell the rage simmering inside me. I remembered myself as a child, running through the green fields of the family farm, making silent vows never to contribute to the deforestation, to the pollution threatening to destroy everything I loved. Those moments were the essence of my pursuit of sustainability. And now, like an actress on a stage, I was being observed by those who should have been my allies, who had instead become my adversaries. My hands trembled slightly. The pressure mounted in my mind. "When are you going to give up these crazy ideas and do something real?" he'd asked one day. It echoed, growing louder with each memory. But I wasn't here to accept my parents' scorn or surrender to their outdated capitalist logic. "You need to understand, Claire," Anthony continued. "The world doesn't need more hippies. What we need are practical people who make money. If you want to make a living from this, you need to realize your idea might just be a whim." I simply took a deep breath, holding his gaze, which felt like a bottomless abyss. The chill inside me became a shield. His words only served as fuel. Since that dinner, a plan began forming in my mind. My family's contempt for me and my work would be the force I needed to move forward and do what was right. They didn't know that just weeks later, my startup would be in a position to buy the very factory polluting our city, the same one fueling my father's business, the true source of evil. The words hippie nonsense echoed in my mind like a call to action. An uncontrollable frustration filled me. As if, deep down, each letter became a sharp blade, cutting me and lifting me up again. I wouldn't let their disdain destroy me. Instead, it would be the path I'd traverse toward my victory. A revenge and a justice all at once. And that night, under the family dinner's lights, I decided the battle had begun. Every step I took towards change, every document I pursued, every conversation with investors I planned, was a step closer to showing them that hippie nonsense would do much more than just dream. I was determined to transform the facade of indifference into a maelstrom of change. And within me, a certainty grew. Payback was coming. They would understand. My childhood days were filled with a profound connection to nature. I remember running through the expansive, flower-filled fields of the family farm, the vibrant colors of the blossoms dancing in the wind, and the feeling of the sun warming my face. There was an intoxicating freedom in the nature it provided, a sense of belonging to something larger. It was there that I dreamed of becoming an environmental advocate, driven by the unwavering belief that every living being deserved its place on a planet so full of beauty. However, as I grew older, that dream began to clash with the reality of a family that worshipped the values of profit above all else. My father, Anthony, was a staunch advocate of traditional capitalism, a successful businessman who saw the world as a battlefield where the only victory that mattered was financial. He relentlessly pursued increasing the profits of his company, a factory that, as I later discovered, polluted the water and air we all breathed. This was his way of securing our future, or so he thought. The conversations about my future became a dangerous dance between hope and despair. One day, with youthful passion, I declared that I wanted to study environmental biology. The furrow of his brow and the look of disdain he offered me at that moment were enough for me to understand that my desire wasn't just ignored. It was ridiculed. "Claire, you know this doesn't pay the bills, right? The world needs practical people who make real money," he said, and the words echoed in my mind like a drumbeat. The life he had planned for me was crumbling before my eyes, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. Every academic achievement I received, every new project I undertook, was always accompanied by comments that dulled any joy I might have felt. "And what are you going to do with a lettuce patch? That's a dream, not a career," he'd continue, as if he wanted to convince me that my ideals were mere illusions. Over the years, his words became the cold facade that shielded my heart from the pain of his contempt. The support and approval I sought from my parents were replaced by veiled criticisms and constant comparisons with my cousins who followed more traditional paths. Meanwhile, my mother, Marina, spent her days in a state of passive resilience. She never directly opposed Anthony's comments, but her half-hearted reassurances, hidden behind a "you know he loves you," never managed to comfort me. Her silence, a tacit acceptance, became a burden I carried in my heart. I knew that, even if he wasn't the main villain, she was in sync with my father's narrative. The home that should have been my safe haven was, in reality, a minefield of expectations and disappointments. On the other hand, my academic life flourished. Gradually, I surrounded myself with friends who shared my passion for a sustainable future, people who understood the significance of small gestures like beach cleanups or reforestation campaigns. It was liberating to see that I wasn't alone in this fight. There was a generation of passionate young people, willing to fight for a cleaner and safer world. Every conversation I had with them was a breath of fresh air compared to the emotional battles I fought at home. However, investments in my startup began to increase. When I finally received the first proposal from an investor who truly believed in ecological solutions, joy flooded my heart like a summer storm. The answer I had always sought in the face of my father's disapproval was waving to me, and I was about to show that hippie nonsense could have a much higher monetary value than the apathy and contempt that had surrounded me. Nevertheless, I knew that as my startup grew, the tension at home increased. Phone calls and meetings became frequent, and every time my phone rang, a part of me hesitated, fearing a negative response from Anthony. I knew that to him, idealism was nothing more than a form of weakness, and I was determined to prove that I had a prominent place in the business world. One day, I sat down to review the data from my father's factory and its impact on local pollution. With every piece of data I encountered, fury and indignation mingled with determination. I saw that it was there, in the heart of what he considered his legacy, that I could find the opportunity to turn the tables. The sheets of paper lined up on my desk began to transform into a plan. A bold plan to not only expose the truth, but to eventually take the reins of operations. It wasn't just about revenge. It had become a matter of justice. With every email I sent, seeking partnerships and advocating for the importance of sustainability, with every chart I created on the costs of pollution, I felt I was getting closer to what would become a direct confrontation with my past and my family. There would be no doubt about what it meant to defend what I believed in. So, looking out the window of my office, immersing myself in the vision of the clean sky I aspired to, I remembered that all the contempt I received at home was transforming into the driving force of my struggle. The idea that every criticism could be a seed of change began to take root in my mind. With every sarcastic word Anthony uttered, I became stronger and more determined. It was as if nature itself was conspiring in my favor. Finally, I was ready to break down the barriers, not only in business terms, but also regarding my family's perception of me. The day I could show Anthony and Marina that my ideas, once dismissed as nonsense, were in fact the future we all deserved, was rapidly approaching. And as this became certain in my mind, hope pulsed within me like an unquenchable fire, ready to ignite the transformation I so longed for. I was determined to no longer live in the shadow of their expectations. Finally, I had a whole world awaiting me. And so, with a renewed vision and determined to shed light on the shadows, I moved forward, determined to turn the tables and make real what once seemed like a distant dream. The true power of change was about to manifest, and I, Claire Rivers, was about to be the architect of this new tomorrow. The first rays of morning sun filtered through my office window, illuminating a desk strewn with papers and reports that had taken weeks to compile. I sat down at my laptop, a pleasant warmth spreading through my palms, as if I were about to embark on a daring journey. The air was thick with anticipation. For the first time, the vision of change didn't seem like a distant dream. A clear path lay before me, one I was determined to follow. My first task was to thoroughly investigate my father's factory. I knew that to dismantle the defenses he had erected around his profits, I would need compelling evidence. He and Carl, the factory manager, weren't ignorant of the plant's dubious practices, but they trusted that no one would expose them. Their complacency gave me an advantage, as I was willing to do whatever it took to bring to light the dark secrets they hid under the guise of business prosperity. I went to the local courthouse to search for factory records. With each document I examined, my heart pounded. I discovered that the plant not only exceeded pollution emission limits, but also had a long list of accumulated environmental fines over the years. Access to information was precious gold, and I was determined to excavate every layer of disbelief surrounding my work. Those numbers, those fines, everything turned to coal under the pressure of my desire for justice. Although I had always viewed my father as a sharp businessman, he had failed to recognize the consequences of his actions. With each investigation, I realized that every revealed irregularity would be another brick in the wall I was building, one that would eventually crumble on his head. The feeling of triumph grew within me with each new discovery. "We need to protect tomorrow," a voice inside me whispered, "and it starts now." Over the following days, a flurry of meetings with my team became routine. We set up a makeshift war room, filled with charts, evidence, and meeting schedules. Each of my colleagues shared a similar passion for the cause, making everything easier. Together, we reviewed strategies demonstrating that change was necessary and, more importantly, feasible. My determination to make a positive impact was what guided this team. Every brainstorming session buzzed with enthusiasm. I needed them to see what was at stake. I remember one moment in particular, when Maria, my best friend and communications expert, said, "Claire, the problem is that many don't understand the true cost of what they do. We need to educate them." Her words resonated in my mind as I thought about my parents' indifference to what we were about to face. The idea of education became a central strategy in our plan. What for them was mere hippie nonsense, for me was an experiment in consciousness raising. Eventually, we gained allies in academia and activist movements, people willing to lend their voices and help shape the narrative we were building. Letters to the editor and social media campaigns began to flow, with the clear objective of exposing the truth about my father's factory. The story was unfolding, and we were the storytellers, writing each word with precision and passion. Their disdain for our ideas slowly transformed into a wave of support that began to spread. One day, during a meeting, a seemingly simple idea emerged. "Why don't we release a report on the factory's environmental impact, comparing it to our sustainable products?" suggested Marta, our data analyst. The room fell silent for a moment, and then everyone began to discuss the potential of this proposal. The project would become a scientific study that would not only reveal the truth about the pollution, but also show how sustainability could be a real and financially viable solution. Inside, a thrill ignited. What I had considered a mere initial ambition was transforming into a truly organic fight. We were putting ourselves in a position of power and promising to be the voice of the voiceless. Discovering that I could not only repel my father's attacks, but also demonstrate the benefits of a more sustainable future was an epiphany. The report could be the weapon I needed to open everyone's eyes, even my father's, who had insisted so many times that I was merely dreaming. After days of continuous work, we finally presented the report in the form of a community conference. Each of us was beaming with anticipation as we invited engaged individuals, including newspaper columnists, university professors, and of course, local media. This would be our opportunity to present the truth and, hopefully, reach the hearts and minds of those who had been blind until then. The days leading up to the event were filled with anxiety and excitement. Part of me wondered if we would really be heard, but another part was confident that the truth carried far more weight than any disdain I had faced until that moment. As I prepared for the presentation, I remembered all the times I had hesitated in the face of my father's word. Now, I was on the front lines. My parents would finally realize that what they considered hippie nonsense was, in fact, a wise and necessary response. On the night of the conference, the auditorium was packed. The lights dimmed as I took the stage, my heart pounding in my chest. But as I looked out at the audience, I saw not just anticipation on their faces, but a spark of hope. And when I began to speak, I was no longer just fighting for myself. I was fighting for everyone who understands that change is possible, that environmental preservation isn't just a dream, it's a necessity. This was no longer an act of revenge. It was the defense of a sustainable future we all deserved. I knew that by presenting that report, I would not only open unexpected doors, but also set the stage for a future confrontation. Tonight would be a giant leap, not only towards justice, but also to reaffirm in the minds of my parents and the entire community that we can be the change agents we want to see. And this was my moment. The conference was a milestone, a bold step towards my commitment to change. As I left the auditorium, adrenaline still coursed through my veins. Friends and supporters gathered around me, praising my performance and the impact of the report. For many, this event was more than a simple presentation. It was a united cry in defense of the environment, a call to action for all of us. However, I couldn't help but notice my parents' faces, especially my father's, which expressed a mixture of shock and disappointment. Despite all the success, their disapproval still weighed heavily on my chest. I realized that this initial victory was, in fact, only the first chapter of a much more complex story. The real challenge lay ahead, and I knew I needed deeper data and irrefutable evidence to persuade not only the community, but even my own parents and the ruthless Carl. I was determined to deepen my investigation and expose the flaws in the factory's operations. To begin, I assembled a group of experts in environmental law and public health, all willing to contribute. We needed to precisely examine the legislation regulating pollution and how the factory's operations fit into that framework. Our team would become one of the pillars of our fight, and it brought a wide range of knowledge that could be used to our advantage. The days that followed were filled with intense research and collaboration. We searched for data on the factory's emissions and any history of fines or problems encountered. With each signed document and each email received, my heart raced. I discovered that the data collected presented a shocking picture of the consequences of the pollution. The evidence was transforming into an incredibly compelling account. One of the first steps was to contact the Environmental Regulatory Agency to request inspection reports. As soon as the information started arriving, a sense of anguish settled over me. Each report revealed not only my father's disregard for the environment, but also the potential for a true tragedy being perpetuated. The total fines imposed by the agency multiplied, signaling that the preventive measures that should have been adopted were being ignored. With this, I understood that not only the future of the environment was at stake, but the health of many who lived near the factory. Discussions and team meetings began to take on a devastating intensity. Andrew, a public health expert who was part of our team, dropped a bombshell during one of the meetings. "Claire, if we don't stop this, we may be condemning our community." Hearing this, I realized that what was happening to our neighbors went beyond pollution. It was a matter of life and death. Every piece of data that came into my hands was a sharp knife, cutting deep into reality and revealing what we needed to do next. To transform this data into a compelling narrative, we decided to conduct fieldwork in the community, collecting accounts from citizens suffering from the effects of pollution. Talking to mothers, teachers, and the elderly, I heard heartbreaking stories. Children succumbing to respiratory illnesses, adults who lost jobs due to health problems. The pain reflected on the face of each one became the visceral motivation needed to go further in this fight. With this information in our favor, we structured a new, even more powerful presentation. The proposal was not only to expose the pollution, but to connect the dots between the factory's activity and the human stories surrounding it. We needed our message to become a community outcry for change, and this new presentation would be our sharpest tool to achieve this. As soon as we scheduled a new event at the City Hall, there was a palpable air of expectation and tension. Unlike the first presentation, where uncertainty hung in the air, we were now imbued with determination. The team's energy was electrifying, and everyone knew that this was the moment when we would need to join forces. The voices of the supporters echoed among us, and the idea that the truth would prevail became a mantra we embraced. The days leading up to the presentation were intense. The community meetings promoted became true spaces of sharing and empowerment, where people began to rise up and speak out. The connection between the City Hall chamber and the voices of the community became increasingly strong. Support was growing, and the idea that we could and should resist this injustice was taking root in the heart of the city. Finally, the night of the presentation arrived. The auditorium was packed, and soon filled with murmurs as the audience eagerly awaited my speech. The pressure was at a critical point. I spotted familiar faces, friends, activists, and of course my parents. Looking at them, I felt intense anticipation, a mix of doubts and hopes intertwined. When my moment to speak arrived, I swallowed hard. I built a scenario where the lives impacted by pollution became the focus of our fight, and each chart I showed highlighted the severity of the situation. This time, I wasn't just presenting data, but also aspirations, dreams that had been cut short by negligence. Each word seemed to resonate in the auditorium walls with profound meaning. The power of personal stories became the anchor holding the presentation together, as it showed that, with the data, we were determined to confront the injustices. For the first time, I saw my father and Carl realize we couldn't be ignored. When I presented the community's environmental rights and the factory's duty to those living nearby, an energy of determination filled everyone present. What needed to be done was clear. It was time to fight against the giants inflicting pain and suffering on our home. At the end of the presentation, a wave of applause swept through the auditorium. The emotion and strength were palpable. People were thirsty for change and joined us in a collective roar. In that space, we weren't just a group seeking justice. We were a community united by a higher purpose. Fueled by a wave of empowerment, I realized the movement was in full swing. The fight against the factory would cease to be just the story of a daughter tired of being dismissed. For the first time, it would be the story of an unresigned community finally rising up. But shoes were about to be dropped. I knew this victory wouldn't come without resistance. My father's last stand wouldn't go quietly in the face of truth. What would happen next was still out of my control, but I sensed a new strength in myself and the people around me. This change I had so longed for was about to become reality, and I was determined to be the architect of this transformation. Leaving the auditorium that night, I was certain the journey for justice was only beginning, but we had already made great strides toward a future that had once seemed so distant. The battle for community rights and the health of our planet would become a legacy that not only I, but everyone around me, would be willing to leave behind. It was time to reverberate the voices of truth. This time, they would be heard and could not be silenced. The days following the conference were filled with infectious energy. The feeling of change hung in the air, and there was a new strength in the community that seemed to increasingly unite people around our cause. Social media was flooded with posts about the event, accompanied by images of citizens joining us. The cry for environmental justice was spreading like wildfire. With each new share, New stories of residents affected by pollution-related illnesses emerged, giving a human face to the suffering the factory was causing. I felt we were getting closer to achieving what truly mattered: the truth. With the pressure mounting, I was more aware than ever that this initial victory wasn't an end, but in fact, a new beginning. Resistance movements began to emerge, with latent citizens finally rising up. People were asking what they could do, and with this energy growing, I realized the future of our environmental justice effort depended on what we did next. I decided we couldn't stop now. We needed to continue to pressure the city council and other authorities to have the factory's operations audited. The data we had collected was solid, but the community needed to be mobilized to demand concrete changes. Soon, we scheduled a new meeting with the council. The continuity of our protest should be balanced with a proactive approach. We wanted them to hear our demand directly, not just the stories on social media. There, feelings were mixed. One was excitement. We were finally making progress, something that had never been possible before. But there was also a shadow of worry looming over me. I knew this mobilization could awaken an undesirable side in my father and Carl. They weren't used to being challenged, and this could lead them to adopt an even more aggressive stance in defending their actions. One night, as my laptop blinked under the soft light of my desk lamp, I called some of the residents who had come forward during the protests. We needed to have a strong support group, and there were many who were willing to meet with the council members. Each call became a powerful reminder of why we were fighting. The faces I heard became more than numbers and statistics. They were lives. Thus, we began planning a new type of appeal. Instead of just collecting accounts, I decided we had to transform them into something impactful. The day of the new meeting was a mix of nervousness and hope. Arriving at the city council, I saw the auditorium filled with people, many of whom had become friends and staunch advocates along the way. My hands trembled as I held my notes, not only because of the responsibility I was about to assume, but also because of the excitement. The local councilors were preparing to listen attentively, and the atmosphere was one of anticipation. As we spoke, each of us shared stories of the devastating effects pollution had on our lives. The whispers of longing turned into shouts of struggle. I spoke of children unable to play outdoors, of mothers worried about their children's future. It was a rich and powerful narrative. With each testimony, a new wave of emotion swept through the room, causing the council members to shift in their seats. They seemed more human, more invested in our suffering, but there could be no complacency. Anger and resentment still ran like a subterranean river beneath the surface, both for us and for Carl and my father. I knew they would be watching, listening with a mixture of contempt and indignation. When I finally asked to speak, the air was so thick with tension you could cut it with a knife. I looked directly into the council members' eyes, and in a moment that seemed to last an eternity, I activated my firm voice. We are here because we can no longer accept that pollution continues to be ignored. Our lives are at risk, and we will not accept this happening in our own backyard. The look on their faces was mixed, some surprised, others skeptical, but all attentive to my words. The depth of their attention emboldened me, and I proceeded with arguments based on the data we had collected, fueled by the passion that filled my heart. The factory should be contributing to the safe development of the community, not destroying it. It's time to demand action. When I finished, applause echoed through the auditorium. The emotional pressure in the room was palpable, and when I looked again at my father and Carl, their faces were hardened in an expression that mixed rage and conflict. It was as if every word I spoke had cut straight into their deepest beliefs. As soon as the meeting ended, the dynamics began to shift. One of the council members proposed a new regulation requiring annual audits of factories in the region to ensure compliance with environmental standards. A wave of enthusiasm spread through the audience, and the support team grew. People were seeing results, and change began to feel real. In the following days, the movement gained momentum. The community pact solidified, and council members faced additional pressure through emails and citizen advocacy. Remorse on the part of local representatives was turning into action. My father and Carl were furious, and I knew they were preparing for an attack. After another meeting, My father's factory quickly organized a press conference to counter the narrative. I had never seen my father so committed to defending the factory as in the following meetings, where we debated the evidence presented by our group. The words diversion tactic became common in his arguments. He tried to argue that all the information we presented was false, and that ultimately, people should be more concerned with the jobs we created and the prosperity we brought. With every word he uttered, the contempt I felt for them grew. But inside, I was in battle, knowing we had the truth on our side. And yet, there was a reward in listening. When Carl began to see them seemingly retaliate, I realized they were moving out of desperation. The resistance they would offer would be against the strength of our unity, and the truth we increasingly wanted to instill in the minds of the community. I knew it was only a matter of time before we faced the consequences of our actions. But instead of backing down, I exchanged glances with the community members. Their determination was contagious and spread within me like a tidal wave. One night, while working on new articles and drafting model legislation, I received a message from a journalist who had just read our report. What he proposed with his suggestion would be a powerful pact. We can cover this case in a series of investigative articles. Let's help spread this truth in the story of the community. I felt that, for the first time, the truth would finally emerge, far from the factory's propaganda. Knowledge was emerging on the waves of the future, and the fight for justice was finally materializing in each of us. As the sun set once more, I realized that the battles we had fought were only the beginning. The truths were beginning to unfold, and I was determined to use the strength of the struggle to defend our legacy, so that no other child in the community would have to face the same problems in the future. With the power of the stories we shared, and many other voices emerging, this fight was finally beginning to take shape. The seed of change we were planting was growing, and I knew the road ahead would be challenging, but my heart was pounding for a fairer future. What we were building together would become something much bigger. That night, I lay in bed in silence. It was a growing cycle, and the words echoed in my mind. Victory is not just winning, it's transforming the world around us. I was stronger than ever, and the fight for the survival of the truth would become a true legacy. The fire of transformation was burning, and I was ready to lead this change. The weeks following the conference were filled with mobilization and unity. The fight for environmental justice was finally taking shape, and the sense of change was palpable. The community was united as never before, and our movement proved stronger than we had imagined. With each new investigative article published, the pressure on my father's factory increased. The truth that had been hidden began to emerge, and the voices of the community were becoming a formidable force. As I observed the reactions to our report and the impact of the journalists' articles, the urgency to act grew within me. The idea of a protest in front of City Hall solidified. We needed to show the mayor and council members the importance of demanding immediate changes. The day of the protest wasn't just a demonstration. It was a show of strength, a call to action that could not be ignored. D-Day arrived. People gathered in front of City Hall, holding signs and chanting slogans. The air was thick with anticipation, and with each sign of support, my determination intensified. Ascending the makeshift podium, I declared, "We are here not only to protest, but to demand dignity and a healthy environment." The crowd roared, and the energy of the event was electrifying. When my father and Carl arrived, the atmosphere shifted. I waited for the moment to confront them, knowing their words would be a desperate attempt to reverse the situation. Carl launched into his speech unceremoniously. "You're hurting jobs and the economy. This factory provides livelihoods for hundreds of families." He was trying to frame our fight for justice as an attack on progress. "And what price are we paying for that, Carl?" I responded, my voice firm. "We are here to fight the pollution that affects our health and ruins our lives. What you consider progress should never come at the cost of the community's well-being." As the tension mounted, I realized the situation could quickly become volatile. Carl and my father were cornered by the growing outrage, but they were also ready to attack. When I saw other community members beginning to speak out, I realized that not only were we united, but the truth was becoming even clearer. The voices of the community echoed in the streets, growing in volume and resonance. The climax of the tension led to an exchange of accusations that quickly attracted the attention of the local media. My father tried to discredit everything we had achieved, but the more he spoke, the more attention was drawn to us. The strength of our movement proved unbreakable. At the end of the protest, my heart pounded with a mixture of triumph and apprehension. We had roused public passion, but we had also awakened the anger of those who felt threatened. Weeks later, as we fought for each new victory, something unexpected happened. A new wave of misinformation emerged. Anonymous letters began circulating, questioning the legitimacy of our movement and suggesting that the fight wasn't genuine, but a ploy by outside forces to destroy local industry. This discrediting strategy had a negative impact, causing some previously engaged citizens to withdraw. It was a cruel tactic, but I knew we couldn't let misinformation win. I gathered our team, and we decided we needed to redouble our efforts and work to educate the community more effectively. We couldn't be swayed by rumors. We needed to be clear about our intentions and keep our message transparent. We began holding informational meetings in various locations, explaining not only the lies being spread, but also exposing the reality we faced with the numbers and data we had collected. We involved the voices affected by the pollution, encouraging them to share their stories. The meetings became a catalyst for reconnecting the community, clarifying the intentions behind the movement. This process of educating and uniting the community had a transformative effect. At each meeting, people felt like active participants in the movement again. The anonymous letters began to lose their power as the evidence became more apparent. The art that adorned the streets with messages of hope and change not only illustrated our struggle, but also served as a constant reminder of what we were fighting for. The murals became a powerful symbol of resilience. They reflected what the community truly thought and felt. In the following months, support for our movement began to expand again. We connected with local influencers and activists who joined our call, helping to amplify our voices. More and more people began to join our movement, bringing their own stories, feelings, and finally, the confidence needed to confront those determined to silence us. With our newfound strength, I decided it was time to confront my father directly. I knew he was on the edge, but there was also the hope that the truth might actually touch his heart, however unlikely that seemed. I invited him for coffee, a gesture that meant so much to me and represented the remnants of our brotherly love. That spring morning, I sat at a table that had been the scene of so many constructive family discussions. He arrived with that weary look, his eyes marked by worry. Coffee was served, and instead of immediately attacking each other, we started with casual conversation. I tried to create a safe space for him to listen. "Dad, the city is changing. The community is demanding justice and what is right," I began, gauging his reaction. "The factory needs to operate responsibly. We can no longer ignore the human cost." A heavy silence hung between us. His eyes drifted, almost as if the weight of reality was becoming unbearable. "Claire, you don't understand. What these people want is to destroy what I built. Living off the protection of profit is all we've ever had, and that's what matters. But the health of families, the happiness of children, this cannot be ignored. Do you care more about your reputation than the lives at stake?" I asked, my voice rising slightly, not wanting to intimidate him, but hoping the words would resonate deep within his conscience. He fell silent for a moment, the tension almost palpable. "I want to protect our family, Claire. I don't want you or anyone to suffer because of this." His tone wavered, like a flickering flame of doubt igniting. "That's what I'm doing. I'm fighting, just like you always have. What's at stake now is the future of our children. Is this how you want your granddaughter to grow up? Living in a world where money is more important than lives?" And there, the conversation took a new turn. To my surprise, he allowed himself to show his vulnerability. What began as a hostile encounter started to transform into a profound dialogue. There was no guarantee this would change his perspective. But for the first time, I saw a glimmer of hesitation in the belief he had defended so fervently. At the end of that conversation, I made it clear that I would continue to fight for a better future, and that his resistance could no longer stifle that fight. As I left the table, my heart was divided. There was one thing I could feel. There was a small hope that the conversation might have not only planted a seed of doubt in his conviction, but also a desire for change. This conversation had become a turning point, and I knew the future would depend on how much we were willing to continue the fight. When I got home, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. The conversations would be long, but the seed of change was beginning to sprout on many levels. The movement continued to gain momentum, and I was ready to lead the transformation towards justice. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, but with each step taken, the fuel of truth was what coursed through our hearts, strengthening our determination. That night, as I rested my head on the pillow, I took a deep breath and allowed the serenity of a new chapter to fill my mind. The truth would prevail, and I was determined to fight until every voice was heard and every injustice corrected. The legacy of our movement would not just be noise, but the force that would change the world that not only I, but all of us, wished to see. Following the press conference, the weeks that followed were intense. The community was more united and full of determination. The environmental justice movement had gained strength, and the truth that was once hidden now spread like wildfire. Local residents, who had previously felt powerless, began to join us, and each new addition became a testament to the impact of the changes we sought. With each new story about our movement, my father's factory became less a bastion of power and more a symbol of resistance. People began to demonstrate more and more, full of passion and hope. This generated a wave of support and energy that seemed boundless. One bright morning, I was invited to participate in a radio program. It was the perfect opportunity to amplify our message. The studio was full of curious journalists and attentive citizens, all ready to hear what we had to say. As soon as I picked up the microphone, permission was given for me to open my heart. Today, we are not just here to talk about statistics or data. We are here to talk about lives. Pollution is not an abstract issue. It affects our homes, our families, and the future of our children, I declared, with emotion pulsing in every word. The audience was engaged, and I could feel the energy growing within that room. During the program, several listeners called, sharing accounts of their own experiences and asking how they could help. Each citizen's support further empowered our movement. Now we were a living force, a community that not only resisted but actively fought for change. But I also knew that this rise could generate fierce resistance. A few nights later, while reviewing events, a message arrived from one of our supporters warning about plans by my father and Carl to call a press conference to deny the accusations made against the factory. I couldn't let them silence our voice again. The next day, I met with our team to develop a strategy. We need to ensure that the truth prevails. They are afraid, and this will lead them to attack. We will not back down. Let's prepare, I declared. We were ready for what was to come. We created a plan to present direct accounts from people affected by the pollution. Finally, the day of my father's press conference arrived. He began his speech, attempting to present the narrative that shaped the factory's prosperity. But as he spoke, I could see the weakness in his gaze. His confidence seemed to crumble under the pressures of the growing movement. I raised my hand, and upon receiving the opportunity to speak, I spoke directly to the audience and the media, with my colleagues in the background, ready to support my words. People's lives cannot be treated merely as statistics. We are here to demand change and accountability. What is at stake is the health of our community. My voice resonated, and as I finished, applause echoed, creating a wave of strength in favor of the truth. The press conference was a battleground, and in this battle, the truth began to defeat the lie. Amidst shouts of support and demonstrations of indignation, the space transformed into a true democratic forum, where finally the voices of the community began to be heard. Amidst the chaos, I saw Carl and my father exchange nervous glances. They were beginning to realize that what had once been a secure fight in the shadows of economic power was morphing into a sad, weakened circle. Something was shifting. The lies he had cultivated for so long were suddenly exposed. Their vulnerability had become a trump card for us, and it was undeniable. In the following months, we continued to expand the movement, organizing community meetings and capturing life stories that highlighted the urgency for change. The mural being painted by local artists became a true gallery, filled with visual narratives capturing the impact of pollution. Each visual impact was a testament to the community's struggle as it moved toward a healthier future. With each new artery of truth emerging, the factory's resistance began to weaken. The appeal to an emotional narrative combined with the data collected by the community became a powerful source of connection with the public. But my father's last-ditch effort wasn't long in coming. On a rainy morning, I received an anonymous message. It was a warning about a planned retaliation. Rumors of suspended licenses and legal actions to reverse our achievements began to spread like wildfire. Carl and my father were preparing for the final battle. Determined to face what was to come, I invited supporters to unite in a new strategy. A silent protest in front of the factory to show that the community was united and that our fight was peaceful but firm. We appealed to dignity and respect, determined to maintain peace. But the message was clear. We wouldn't back down. On the day of the protest, a crowd gathered, making it clear that we could act peacefully and still be strong. I was the architect of the movement, and from that morning on, I knew that the ambitions were no longer just mine, but those of the community that was awakening. It was the moment when truth and transformation would begin to materialize in their fullness. When I returned home that night, a new sense of possibility filled my heart. The voices for change were strong, and I was empowered. What we were building was becoming a legacy that could inspire many. The fight was far from over, but now we were a force to be reckoned with, ready to face any challenge and force the changes we so desired. And so, as the stars shone outside, I knew we were on the right path toward truth. A fairer, cleaner future was approaching.